The sun beat down on Red Hollow like a curse. Evelyn Hart stood on the auction platform with iron shackles cutting into her wrists, her dress torn at the shoulder, dried blood still crusting the hem from 3 days ago when they'd killed Samuel. Samuel, who'd been the only family she had left after the fever took her parents. Samuel, who'd promised to get her safely to California where her aunt lived. Samuel, who now lay in an unmarked grave somewhere between here and the Kansas border, shot through the chest by the same men who'd dragged Evelyn onto this godforsaken stage. The crowd below her stank of whiskey and sweat. Miners with dirt under their fingernails. Drifters with guns on their hips. Men who looked at her the way vultures looked at dying cattle. "Gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice carried across the dusty square, and Evelyn wanted to spit in his face. "Gentlemen," as if any man standing here deserved that word. "We've got ourselves a rare opportunity today. Young woman, strong back, can cook and clean. No family to come looking, no complications." No complications. That's what her life had been reduced to. Someone in the crowd laughed, and the sound made Evelyn's stomach turn. She'd cried herself dry the first night in the wagon. The second night she'd screamed until her throat bled. By the third night she'd gone silent, and that silence had hardened into something else. Something colder. She wouldn't give these bastards her tears. Not anymore. "Do I hear 500? The auctioneer called. A man in a stained vest raised his hand. Evelyn didn't look at him. She looked past the crowd, past the wooden buildings of Red Hollow, toward the mountains in the distance. If she could just get free, if she could just reach those mountains. 600. 7. The bids came faster now, and Evelyn felt her throat closing. Her hands trembled despite her best efforts to steady them. She'd told herself she was prepared for this. She'd told herself she could survive whatever came next. But hearing these men price her like a horse, like a piece of furniture. $1,000. The crowd murmured. That was serious money. Evelyn finally looked down and saw the man who'd bid, a cattle broker named Silas Crow, his belly straining against his vest, his eyes small and mean. She'd heard him talking earlier, bragging to his friends about the investment opportunities in the territories, about how a smart man could make a fortune if he knew how to manage his assets. Assets. That's what she was to him. Crow smiled at her, showing yellow teeth. "Don't look so frightened, sweetheart. I'll treat you real good." The men around him laughed, and Evelyn knew exactly what kind of treatment he meant. Her fingernails dug into her palms hard enough to draw blood. 1,000 going once, the auctioneer shouted. Going twice. $3,000. The voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter, and every head in the square turned. A man sat on horseback at the edge of the crowd, and even from the platform, Evelyn could tell he was different from the others. Tall in the saddle, shoulders broad beneath a worn leather coat. His hat shadowed most of his face, but she caught a glimpse of a strong jaw, a mouth set in a hard line. The horse beneath him was a massive roan, well-fed and well-trained, and the rifle scabbard at his knee looked like it saw regular use. The crowd parted as he walked the horse forward, and Evelyn realized men were stepping aside, not out of courtesy, but out of something closer to caution. Maybe fear. "Did you say 3,000? The auctioneer stammered. "You heard me right." The stranger's voice was rough, like whiskey over gravel. Western accent, but educated beneath it. Not a drifter then. Not just another prospector chasing fool's gold. "Sir, that's..." The auctioneer looked like he'd swallowed a bug. "That's an extraordinary sum for..." "Then you'll take it." Not a question. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, tossing it to the auctioneer with enough force that the man had to scramble to catch it. "Count it if you want. It's all there." Silas Crow pushed forward, his face red. "Now hold on just a goddamn minute. You got a problem with honest business, Crow?" The stranger's hand didn't move toward his gun, but somehow the threat was there anyway, hanging in the air like smoke. Crow's jaw worked, but he didn't answer. The men around him shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a scarred man with a knife on his belt, put a hand on Crow's shoulder and shook his head slightly. "Not worth it," the gesture said. "Not with this one." "Sold!" the auctioneer practically shouted, eager to end the confrontation. "Sold to Mr. Mercer," the stranger said. "Rowan Mercer." He dismounted in one smooth motion and walked toward the platform. Up close, Evelyn could see him better. Maybe 35, weathered skin that spoke of years under the sun, a scar running from his left eyebrow into his hairline. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and when they met hers, she felt something shift in her chest. Not hope, exactly. She'd learned better than that, but something close to it. Rowan climbed the steps to the platform. The auctioneer fumbled with keys, unlocking the chains that bound Evelyn to the post, but leaving her wrists shackled. There you are, Mr. Mercer. All yours. No refunds, mind you. And Rowan took the keys from the auctioneer's hand without a word. Then he turned to Evelyn and did something she never expected. He unlocked her wrist shackles and let them fall to the wooden planks with a clang that seemed to echo across the entire square. Evelyn stared at him. The crowd went silent. "No one owns you anymore," Rowan said quietly, so only she could hear. Then louder, to the crowd. "This business is done. Anyone who's got a problem with that can take it up with me directly." His hand moved to rest on his gun belt, and the message was clear. No one moved. Even Crow, still red-faced and furious, stayed where he was. Rowan looked at Evelyn. "You can come with me if you want, or you can walk away right now. Your choice. Your choice." Evelyn couldn't remember the last time anyone had given her a choice about anything. She looked at the crowd, at Crow's hateful glare, at the other men who'd been bidding on her minutes ago. Then she looked back at Rowan Mercer, the stranger who'd just spent a fortune to buy her freedom instead of her body. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust anyone anymore. But staying here meant Crow would find a way to claim what he thought he'd lost. Staying here meant death, or worse. "I'll come," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. Rowan nodded once. "Stay close." He led her off the platform and toward his horse. The crowd parted again, but Evelyn could feel their eyes on her back, could hear the muttering starting up. Someone spat in the dust near her feet. She flinched, but kept walking. When they reached the horse, Rowan swung into the saddle and offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was strong, but not crushing, and he pulled her up behind him with an ease that suggested he'd done this before. "Hold on," he said. Evelyn wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath the coat, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The horse moved forward at a walk, and she expected someone to shout, to try to stop them. The gunshot cracked through the air, and the horse reared. Evelyn nearly fell, but Rowan's arm shot back to steady her, while his other hand controlled the panicking animal. "That's my property you're stealing, Mercer." Silas Crow stood in the middle of the square with a smoking pistol in his hand. "I had the winning bid before you showed up." "You lost," Rowan said coldly. "Learn to live with it." $3,000 doesn't change what she is, doesn't change what's right out here." Crow's voice rose to a shout. "You think you can just walk into Red Hollow and—" Rowan's gun cleared leather so fast Evelyn barely saw it. One moment his hand was on the reins, the next the barrel was pointed straight at Crow's chest. "I think I can do whatever I damn well please," Rowan said, his voice deadly quiet. "And I think you're going to put that gun away and walk back to whatever hole you crawled out of, or I'm going to put a bullet between your eyes and sleep just fine tonight." The square had gone dead silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Crow's hand shook, but he lowered the gun. The scarred man who'd stopped him earlier took it from his hand entirely. "This isn't over," Crow said. "It is for today." Rowan holstered his weapon and touched his heels to the horse's flanks. The roan moved forward at a trot, then a canter, carrying them out of Red Hollow toward the open country beyond. Evelyn held on tight, her heart hammering, half expecting another shot. But none came. The town fell away behind them, and soon there was nothing but grassland and the distant mountains and the rhythm of hoofbeats. They rode for an hour without speaking. The sun climbed higher, and Evelyn's arms began to ache from holding on, but she didn't complain. Didn't say a word. She just watched the landscape change around them. Rolling hills giving way to rougher terrain, pine trees appearing in clusters, a creek winding through a valley. Finally, Rowan slowed the horse to a walk and broke the silence. "There's a ranch about 2 hours northwest of here," he said. "My ranch. You'll be safe there." "Why?" The word came out sharper than Evelyn intended. "Why what? Why did you do that? Why did you pay all that money just to—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, rougher. "Because no one should be sold like livestock. Because I've seen what men like Crow do to people they think they own, and because he stopped himself. Because what? Doesn't matter. He urged the horse forward again. You don't owe me anything. When we get to the ranch, you can rest, get your strength back. After that, if you want to move on, I'll give you money for passage to wherever you want to go. No strings. No strings. Evelyn wanted to believe him, but belief was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. What if I believe you're lying? She asked. Rowan's shoulders stiffened slightly, but he didn't get angry. Then I guess I'll have to prove otherwise. They rode on. The landscape grew more rugged as they traveled, the easy hills giving way to rocky outcroppings and thick stands of pine. The path, such as it was, wound through narrow valleys where the shadows fell deep and cold. Evelyn saw deer watching them from the tree line, and once the massive silhouette of what might have been a bear, far up on a ridge. The sun was past its peak when they stopped at a stream to water the horse. Rowan dismounted first, then helped Evelyn down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. It had been days since she'd ridden, and before that she'd been locked in a wagon. Everything hurt. Easy, Rowan said, steadying her. Sit down before you fall down. Evelyn sank onto a flat rock near the water. Her whole body felt like one big bruise. She watched as Rowan led the horse to drink, checking its hooves, running his hands along its flanks with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent his life around animals. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and brought it to her. Drink, slowly. The water was cold and clean, better than anything she'd tasted in weeks. Evelyn forced herself to sip instead of gulp, though her throat screamed for more. Thank you, she said quietly. Rowan nodded and moved back to the horse, giving her space. That struck her as deliberate, the way he kept his distance, didn't crowd her, like he understood that trust couldn't be demanded, only earned. Or maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe he just didn't care enough to bother. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said after a few minutes. Sure. That money you spent. $3,000. That's... She shook her head. That's enough to buy a good piece of land, enough to stock a ranch for a year, maybe more. Why would you waste it on... You're not a waste, Rowan interrupted, his voice harder than before. He turned to face her fully. Don't call yourself that. Don't even think it. Evelyn felt her cheeks flush. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. He took a breath, seemed to force himself to relax. Look, I'm not a rich man. That $3,000 was most of what I had saved, but money comes and goes. Some things matter more. Like what? Like doing the right thing when you've got the chance. He looked away toward the mountains. I haven't always been good at that. Figured I was due to try. There was a story there buried under those words, but Evelyn didn't push. She barely knew this man. Hell, she didn't know him at all except that he'd apparently decided her freedom was worth bankrupting himself over. Which made no damn sense, but she was too tired to puzzle it out. How much farther to your ranch? She asked. Another hour, hour and a half. We'll get there before dark. He walked over and offered his hand again. You ready to move? Evelyn nodded and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs still protested, but she could stand without swaying now. That was something. They mounted up again and rode on, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, sharper, scented with pine, and something else Evelyn couldn't quite name. Freedom, maybe. Or just the absence of the stench of Red Hollow. The trail narrowed in places, hemmed in by rock walls on one side and steep drops on the other. Evelyn tried not to look down at those drops. Tried not to think about what would happen if the horse stumbled, but Rowan rode with confidence, and the roan never put a foot wrong. What's the horse's name? Evelyn asked, more to distract herself than anything. Sirocco. That's an unusual name. It's a wind. Hot wind that blows across deserts. Rowan patted the horse's neck. Found him half dead in Arizona 6 years ago. Some fool had ridden him into the ground and left him to die. Nursed him back, and he's been with me ever since. Evelyn thought about that. About a man who'd save a dying horse. About a man who'd pay a fortune to free a woman from auction. The pieces didn't quite fit together into a coherent picture, but maybe that was because she was looking for the wrong pattern. Maybe Rowan Mercer was just what he appeared to be. Someone who couldn't walk past suffering without trying to stop it. Or maybe he was very, very good at seeming like that kind of person. She still didn't know, still didn't trust him, but she was glad she wasn't in Red Hollow anymore. The sun was touching the western peaks when they crested a final ridge, and Evelyn saw the ranch spread out in the valley below. It wasn't huge, not like the sprawling cattle operations she'd seen in Kansas, but it was more than a simple homestead. A main house built of logs and stone, smoke rising from its chimney, a barn, corrals, a few outbuildings, horses in a pasture, maybe a dozen of them, cattle grazing on the slopes beyond. It looked solid, real, like a place someone had built with their own hands and meant to keep. Home, Rowan said simply. They rode down into the valley as the shadows lengthened. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, tall and lean with dark skin and gray threading through his black hair. He saw Rowan and raised a hand in greeting, but his eyes went to Evelyn with obvious curiosity. "Mateo," Rowan called as they got close. "This is Evelyn Hart. She'll be staying with us for a while." Mateo's expression didn't change, but Evelyn caught the quick assessing look he gave her torn dress, her bruised wrists where the shackles had been. Understanding flickered in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, nodding to her. "Welcome to the Mercer Ranch." His voice was cultured, with an accent that suggested Mexico or maybe Spain. Not what Evelyn expected from a ranch hand in the middle of the Montana Territory. Rowan dismounted and helped Evelyn down again. Her legs were steadier this time, though still sore. "Mateo Reyes is my foreman," Rowan explained. "He runs this place when I'm not here and honestly does a better job than I do even when I am." "You flatter me," Mateo said dryly. Then to Evelyn, "You look exhausted. When did you last eat?" Evelyn tried to remember. "Yesterday, maybe the day before." Mateo frowned. "Rowan, take her inside. I'll handle Sirocco and bring food in a few minutes." "I can help," Evelyn started, but Rowan shook his head. "Not tonight. Tonight you rest." He led her toward the house, and Evelyn felt a strange reluctance as they approached the door. Once she went inside, she'd be accepting his hospitality, accepting his help. That felt dangerous somehow, like giving up control. But what control did she have? What choice? The door opened into a large room that served as both kitchen and living area. Simple furniture, well made, but not fancy. A fire in the stone fireplace. Books on a shelf. Actual books. More than Evelyn would have expected. The whole place was clean, organized, nothing like the bachelor squalor she might have anticipated. "There's a room upstairs," Rowan said, pointing to a ladder leading up to a loft. "It's not much, but it's private. There's a lock on the inside of the door. A lock on the inside. So she could keep him out." Evelyn looked at him sharply, and Rowan met her gaze without flinching. "I meant what I said in Red Hollow," he told her. "No one owns you. That includes me. This is a place to rest and heal. Nothing more. Nothing less." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it frightened her. "Okay," she said quietly. Rowan nodded. "Get settled. I'll be outside if you need anything." He left, closing the door behind him, and Evelyn stood alone in the quiet house. For a moment she just breathed, taking in the smell of wood smoke and coffee and something cooking, bread maybe, from earlier in the day. Normal smells. Human smells. Not the stink of the wagon, not the blood and fear of the last week. She climbed the ladder to the loft and found the room Rowan had mentioned. It was small but clean, a narrow bed with a quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a trunk at the foot of the bed. A single window looked out over the valley, and through it Evelyn could see the mountains darkening against the sunset sky. She sat on the bed and felt the softness of the mattress, the give of actual springs instead of a wagon floor or dirt ground. Her hands started shaking then, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally draining away. She'd survived. Somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. But she wasn't safe yet. Couldn't be safe. Men like Silas Crow didn't just let go of what they wanted, and she'd seen the look in his eyes when Rowan had taken her away. That wasn't over. Nothing was over. A knock at the base of the ladder made her jump. "Miss Hart?" Mateo's voice. "I've brought food." Evelyn went to the ladder and climbed down. Mateo stood in the main room with a tray, bread, cheese, some kind of stew that smelled like heaven. He set it on the table and stepped back, giving her space the same way Rowan had. "Thank you," Evelyn said. Mateo nodded. "Rowan told me a little of what happened in Red Hollow. I want you to know—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've worked for Rowan Mercer for 8 years. In that time, I've never known him to lie, and I've never known him to break his word. If he says you're safe here, you're safe. You trust him that much? With my life? Mateo smiled slightly. He's a hard man, but a good one. Give him a chance to prove it. I don't have much choice about that, do I? We always have choices, Mateo said gently. Sometimes they're just between bad options and worse ones. But even then, we choose. He left her to eat, and Evelyn sat down at the table. The stew was venison, rich and savory, and the bread was fresh enough that steam still rose when she tore into it. She ate slowly at first, then faster as her stomach reminded her how long it had been since real food. Through the window, she could see Rowan and Mateo outside, tending to the horses. They worked together with an easy rhythm that spoke of long familiarity, and watching them, Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Maybe they were telling the truth. Maybe this place really was what it seemed, or maybe she was a fool for even considering the possibility. She finished eating and climbed back to the loft, to the small room with the door that locked from the inside. She turned that lock with shaking fingers, testing it twice to make sure it held. Then she lay down on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling as darkness fell outside and the sounds of the ranch settled into night quiet. Sleep should have been easy. She was exhausted down to her bones. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the auction platform, saw the faces in the crowd, saw Silas Crow's yellow teeth as he smiled at her. She heard Samuel's last words, "Run, Evie, just run." But she hadn't run, hadn't been fast enough, hadn't been smart enough. And Samuel had died for nothing. Tears came then, hot and bitter, and Evelyn pressed her face into the pillow to muffle the sounds. She cried for Samuel, for her parents, for the life she'd lost and the future that had been stolen. She cried until there was nothing left, until the tears dried up and left only a hollow ache behind. Somewhere in that exhaustion, sleep finally found her. She woke to gunshots. Evelyn bolted upright in the darkness, heart slamming against her ribs. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back and she scrambled out of bed, pressing herself against the wall beside the window. More shots. Shouting. The sound of horses screaming. Oh God, they'd found her. Crow had... Light flared below. Torches, 3 or 4 of them, circling the barn. Evelyn could see figures on horseback, could hear their voices even if she couldn't make out the words. The front door of the house slammed open and she heard Rowan's boots on the floor below. "Stay inside," he shouted up toward the loft. "Lock the door and stay away from the windows." Then he was gone, and Evelyn was alone in the dark with the sound of violence erupting outside. She should stay put, should hide. That's what Rowan had told her to do. But hiding hadn't saved Samuel. Hiding hadn't saved anyone. Evelyn grabbed the wash basin pitcher, the only weapon she could find, and crept to the ladder. She could see through the lower window now. Rowan and Mateo had taken cover behind a water trough, rifles in hand. The riders were staying back, just out of range, but one of them threw a torch that landed on the barn roof. The dry wood caught instantly. Evelyn's breath stopped. The horses. There were horses in that barn. She saw Rowan break from cover, running toward the barn despite the gunfire. Saw him wrench the doors open as flames licked up the roof. Saw horses burst out in a panic, their eyes rolling white with terror. One of the riders laughed, she could hear it from here, and raised his rifle. Without thinking, Evelyn grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the kitchen and threw it through the lower window. The glass exploded outward and the rider's horse spooked, rearing. The shot went wild, and Rowan made it to cover behind the barn's water barrel. "Get back inside!" he roared at her. But Mateo was yelling something too, and Evelyn saw another rider circling toward the house, coming for her specifically. She ran back up the ladder and slammed the loft door shut, throwing the lock just as boots hit the main floor below. Someone tried the door, then put their shoulder to it. The wood groaned, but held. "Come on out, sweetheart," a voice called. Not Crow. Someone else. "We're just here to collect what's owed. Make this easy on yourself." Evelyn backed away from the door, the pitcher raised like a club. Her whole body shook, but her mind was clear, cold. If they got through that door, she'd fight. She'd fight until they killed her, because she'd rather die than go back to that auction platform. Another impact on the door. The frame cracked. Then a gunshot, so close it made Evelyn's ears ring. The pounding stopped. She heard a body hit the floor, heard cursing, heard Rowan's voice. Anyone else wants to try? Silence. Then the sound of horses retreating at a gallop. Evelyn stayed frozen, pitcher still raised, until Rowan called up. They're gone! You can come down! She unlocked the door on shaking hands and climbed down the ladder. A man lay on the floor near the entrance, blood pooling under his shoulder. Not dead, but wounded badly enough that he wasn't getting up. Rowan stood over him with his rifle, and Mateo was at the door watching the darkness. How bad? Rowan asked without looking away from the wounded man. Barn's going to be a total loss, Mateo reported. But we got the horses out. 3 heads scattered into the valley. I'll track them at first light. Rowan finally looked at Evelyn. His face was hard, unreadable. I told you to stay inside. I did stay inside. You broke a window and threw a skillet at armed men. The window was getting stuffy. The words came out sharper than she meant, but fear had a way of turning into anger. And you're welcome for the distraction. Something flickered in Rowan's eyes. Might have been amusement, might have been frustration. Fair enough. The wounded man groaned and Rowan knelt beside him. Who sent you? Was it Crow? The man spat blood. Go to hell. You're the one bleeding out on my floor. I'd be more cooperative if I were you. Rowan pressed his hand over the wound, and the man screamed. Who sent you? Crow, the man gasped. Crow paid us. Said to burn you out and bring back the girl. How many more are coming? I don't. Another press. Another scream. 6 more men in Red Hollow, please. Rowan stood up and looked at Mateo. Bandage him and tie him to the fence post. At first light, you ride to town and get the marshal. There's no marshal in Red Hollow worth the title, Mateo said quietly. Then ride to Helena. Federal marshal there owes me a favor. Rowan turned to Evelyn. Pack whatever you need for a few days. We're leaving before dawn. Leaving? Evelyn felt panic spike in her chest. Where? Higher up in the mountains. There's a hunting cabin about 6 hours from here. Mateo will bring the marshal back here. Show him the barn. Show him, he gestured at the wounded man. The evidence. Get a warrant for Crow. In the meantime, you and I are going to disappear for a while. I'm not running again, Evelyn said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. I'm done running. Rowan met her eyes, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the blood-stained floor. This isn't running, he said finally. This is staying alive long enough to fight back properly. You can't fight if you're dead. He was right. Evelyn hated it, but he was right. Fine, she said. But when we come back, I want to learn how to shoot. Rowan's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. Deal. They left before the sun rose, following a trail that barely deserved the name. Rowan led a pack horse loaded with supplies, and Evelyn rode behind him on Sirocco again, watching the ranch disappear into the pre-dawn darkness. The barn was still smoking. The smell of burned wood followed them for miles. As the sun finally broke over the eastern peaks, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Evelyn looked back one last time. She thought about Silas Crow sitting in Red Hollow with his hired guns. She thought about the life she'd lost and the future that still felt impossible to imagine. But mostly she thought about the man riding ahead of her, the stranger who'd paid everything he had to buy her freedom and was now risking his life to keep her safe. She still didn't fully trust him. But maybe, just maybe, she was starting to want to. The cabin sat wedged between 2 granite cliffs, like something that had grown there naturally, half hidden by lodgepole pines and a thick tangle of juniper. Evelyn wouldn't have seen it at all if Rowan hadn't pointed it out. The logs had weathered to the same gray as the surrounding stone, and moss covered half the roof. Built it myself about 5 years back, Rowan said as he dismounted. Use it during hunting season mostly. Nobody knows it's here except me and Mateo. Evelyn slid off Sirocco's back, her legs screaming in protest. They'd been riding since before dawn, climbing higher and higher into country so remote she hadn't seen a single sign of human habitation in hours. Just mountains and trees, and the occasional glimpse of wildlife watching them pass. Her whole body ached. The rough clothes Rowan had given her before they left, his spare shirt and a pair of Mateo's old trousers cinched tight with rope, chafed in places she didn't want to think about. But at least she wasn't wearing that torn dress anymore. At least she didn't look like a victim. Rowan unpacked the horses while Evelyn stood there uselessly, not sure what to do with her hands. She'd been raised to help, to make herself useful, but exhaustion had turned her muscles to water. "Go inside," Rowan said without looking at her. "There's a water pump around back if you want to wash up. I'll get a fire going." The cabin's interior was smaller than she'd expected. Basically one room with a stone fireplace at one end and a sleeping loft above. Sparse furniture, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, some shelves stocked with supplies and sealed jars. Everything covered in a thin layer of dust that suggested no one had been here in months. Evelyn found the pump behind the cabin, worked the handle until clear water gushed out. She splashed her face, scrubbed her hands and arms, trying to wash away the smell of smoke and fear that seemed to have soaked into her skin. The water was ice cold, probably fed by snowmelt from higher up, and it shocked her awake in a way coffee never could. When she came back inside, Rowan had a fire crackling in the hearth and was setting out supplies on the table. Dried meat, hardtack, coffee, a few tins of beans. Not exactly a feast, but more than she'd had any right to expect. "How long do we stay here?" she asked. "Depends on how fast Mateo can get the marshal moving. 3 days? Maybe 4. Rowan looked at her properly for the first time since they'd arrived. "You holding up?" "I'm fine." "You're exhausted. And probably terrified, even if you won't admit it." Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. "I said I'm fine." "Right." Rowan turned his attention back to the fire. "There's blankets in the chest if you want to rest. I'll take first watch outside." "Watch for what? You said nobody knows we're here." "I said nobody knows the cabin exists. Crow's men could still track us if they're good enough." He picked up his rifle and headed for the door. "Lock it behind me. Don't open it unless you hear my voice." He left before she could argue, and Evelyn stood there in the empty cabin feeling anger rise in her chest. She was tired of being told what to do, tired of being protected like some fragile thing that might shatter if handled wrong. But she locked the door anyway because she wasn't stupid enough to ignore good advice just because it irritated her. The blanket smelled like cedar and old smoke. Evelyn wrapped herself in one and sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the silence of the mountains. It was so quiet up here it almost hurt. No town noise, no wagon wheels, no voices. Just wind in the pines and the occasional call of a bird she couldn't identify. She should sleep, should take advantage of the safety while she had it. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the barn burning, saw that man's blood pooling on Rowan's floor, saw Crow's face when Rowan had taken her away from the auction. This wasn't over. Wouldn't be over just because they'd run to the mountains and hidden like rabbits in a hole. Evelyn must have dozed eventually because she jerked awake to the sound of someone working the door latch. Her hand went to the fire poker before she was fully conscious, gripping it like a weapon. "It's me," Rowan's voice came through the door. "I'm coming in." She unlocked it with shaking hands, feeling foolish for the spike of panic. Rowan stepped inside carrying an armload of firewood and what looked like 2 rabbits, already cleaned. "Dinner," he said, holding up the rabbits. "If you're hungry." Evelyn's stomach answered for her with an embarrassing growl. She hadn't eaten since before dawn, and the dried meat Rowan had set out earlier hadn't been appealing enough to touch. "I can cook them," she offered, "if you've got a pan." "Under the shelf." Rowan stacked the firewood by the hearth. "I'll be outside if you need anything." "You don't have to keep leaving," Evelyn said. "This is your cabin. I'm the one who should—" "You should do whatever makes you comfortable," Rowan interrupted. "I'm giving you space because I figured you'd want it. If I'm wrong, tell me." Evelyn looked at him, this man she still barely knew. His face was hard to read in the firelight, all angles and shadows. But his eyes were steady, waiting for an answer without pressure. "You can stay," she said finally. "If you want." Rowan nodded and settled into one of the chairs, cleaning his rifle with practiced movements while Evelyn figured out the cooking setup. She found a cast iron pan, some lard in a sealed jar, salt in another. Basic supplies, but enough. She'd learned to cook young. Her mother had made sure of that before the fever took her. The skills had stayed even through the worst times, muscle memory that didn't need thought. Soon she had the rabbit pieces sizzling in the pan, the smell of cooking meat filling the small cabin. "You're good at that," Rowan observed. "Had practice." Evelyn flipped the pieces, watching the fat render. "My mother ran a boarding house in St. Louis. I helped her in the kitchen from the time I could reach the stove." "That where you're from originally?" "Born there. Lived there until the fever came through in '73. The words came out flat, drained of emotion. She'd told this story enough times that it had stopped hurting, mostly. Killed both my parents within a week of each other. Samuel, my guardian, he was my father's business partner. Took me in because there was nobody else. Rowan was quiet for a moment. The man who died protecting you. He tried. Evelyn turned the rabbit pieces again, even though they didn't need it. We were headed to California. My aunt lives there, my mother's sister. Samuel was going to take me to her, start fresh somewhere the fever hadn't touched. We made it as far as Kansas before... She didn't finish. Didn't need to. I'm sorry, Rowan said, and something in his voice made her look at him. He wasn't just offering empty condolences. He meant it. Not your fault. No, but that doesn't make it less terrible. Evelyn pulled the pan off the heat and divided the rabbit between 2 tin plates. She handed one to Rowan along with a fork, then took the other chair. They ate in silence for a while. The rabbit was gamey but tender, and Evelyn was hungry enough that it tasted better than anything she'd had in recent memory. Across from her, Rowan ate methodically, efficiently, like a man who'd learned to take nutrition when he could get it rather than wait for pleasure. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said finally. Go ahead. Why did you really buy me at that auction? She set her fork down and looked at him directly. And don't tell me it's just because it was the right thing to do. Nobody spends $3,000 on principle alone. Rowan stopped eating. For a long moment he just sat there, and Evelyn thought he might refuse to answer. Then he set his plate aside and leaned back in his chair. I had a sister, he said quietly. Emma. She was 16 when raiders hit our homestead in Colorado. This was back in '71, right after the war. A lot of bad men roaming around doing bad things because they could. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She could see where this was going. They killed my parents, burned the house, took Emma. Rowan's voice was carefully controlled, but Evelyn could hear the tension underneath. I was in town buying supplies when it happened. By the time I got back, there was nothing left but ashes and blood. I tracked them for 3 months, got close twice. But I was young and stupid, and they were experienced killers. You never found her? No. The word came out hard. Eventually, I had to accept she was gone, dead or sold or worse. I'll never know. Evelyn understood now. Understood why a stranger would risk everything to pull a woman off an auction platform. I'm not your sister, she said gently. I know that. Rowan looked at her and his eyes were haunted. But when I heard about the auction in Red Hollow, heard some bastards were selling a woman like property, I couldn't just walk away. Couldn't live with myself if I did nothing. So I took every dollar I'd saved and I bought your freedom, because maybe if someone had done that for Emma, she'd still be alive. The cabin fell silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Evelyn didn't know what to say. Sorry seemed inadequate. Thank you seemed wrong. Nothing seemed right for the weight of what he'd just shared. I'm going to pay you back, she said finally. The $3,000. However long it takes, I'll... No, Rowan's voice was firm. That money's gone. I don't want it back. But, Evelyn. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You don't owe me anything. Not money, not gratitude, not loyalty. You're free. That means you get to decide what happens next, not me. When this is over, when Crow's dealt with, you can go wherever you want. I'll give you money for the journey and wish you well. And if I don't want to go anywhere? The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. She hadn't planned to say it, hadn't even been sure she was thinking it until the words were out. Rowan studied her face. What do you mean? I mean, Evelyn struggled to articulate something she didn't fully understand herself. I've spent the last week being dragged from place to place with no say in where I went or what happened to me. And now you're telling me I can go wherever I want, but the truth is I don't know where that is. I don't have family except an aunt I haven't seen in 10 years. I don't have money or skills beyond cooking and keeping house. So maybe I don't want to rush off to the next place just because I can. Maybe I want to figure out what I actually want first. Fair enough, Rowan said slowly. So what are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to stay at the ranch for a while. Work for my keep. Learn how to survive out here instead of just depending on the next person who takes pity on me. She held his gaze. I'm saying I want to stop being helpless. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. You're not helpless. You threw a skillet through a window at armed men. That was stupid, not brave. Maybe, but it worked. He stood up and collected their plates. If you want to stay and learn, I can teach you. Mateo, too. But it won't be easy. Ranch work is hard, and up here in the mountains, it's harder still. I'm not afraid of hard work. Didn't think you were. Rowan moved to the door. I'm going to check the perimeter before dark. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start teaching you how to shoot. He left before she could respond, and Evelyn sat alone by the fire again, wondering what she'd just committed herself to. A few days ago, she'd been on an auction platform with no future at all. Now she was in a mountain cabin, making plans to learn rifle shooting from a man she barely knew. Life had gotten strange fast. She cleaned up the cooking supplies and banked the fire, then climbed the ladder to the sleeping loft. There was only one bed up here, narrow but sufficient, and she half expected some kind of conflict about the sleeping arrangements. But when Rowan came back inside an hour later, he just grabbed a bedroll from the chest and spread it on the floor by the hearth without comment. "Good night," he called up. "Good night," Evelyn replied, and meant it. She lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the mountains, wind, something howling far away that might have been a wolf, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. Morning came cold and gray, with mist hanging in the valleys below the cabin like spilled milk. Evelyn woke to the smell of coffee and found Rowan already up, the fire rebuilt and breakfast supplies laid out. "You sleep?" she asked, climbing down from the loft. "Enough." He poured coffee into a battered tin cup and handed it to her. "We'll eat, then start your lessons." "What kind of lessons?" "The kind that keep you alive." Rowan smiled slightly. "Starting with firearms." After a breakfast of hardtack softened in coffee and some of the dried meat, Rowan led Evelyn outside into a clearing about 50 yards from the cabin. He carried his rifle and a gun belt with a holstered revolver. "Ever fired a gun before?" he asked. "Once. My father let me shoot his old pistol when I was 12. Nearly broke my wrist." "Probably too much gun for you." Rowan drew the revolver from the holster, a Colt Peacemaker, well-maintained, and checked the cylinder. "This is a .45. Heavy caliber, serious kick, but it's reliable, and if you hit something with it, it stays down." He spent the next hour teaching her the basics: how to hold the weapon, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. Evelyn's hand shook at first, but Rowan was patient, adjusting her grip and stance until it felt more natural. "Don't aim at anything you don't intend to kill," he said, "and don't draw unless you're prepared to shoot. A gun is a tool, not a threat. The moment you pull it, you've made a commitment." They set up targets, chunks of wood balanced on rocks, and Rowan had her practice dry firing until the motion felt automatic. Then he loaded a single round and stepped back. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Evelyn raised the gun, sighted down the barrel at the nearest target, and squeezed. The Colt roared and bucked in her hand, the recoil driving her back a step. The bullet kicked up dirt 3 feet to the left of the target. "Again," Rowan said, reloading for her. She missed the second shot too, and the third. By the 10th shot, her wrist ached and frustration had settled into her chest like a stone. "This is useless," she said. "I can't hit anything." "You've been shooting for an hour. Nobody's good at this that fast." Rowan took the gun and demonstrated, hitting 3 targets in quick succession. "I've been doing this since I was 8 years old. Give yourself time." "We might not have time. Crow's not stupid enough to track us this far into the mountains. Even if he wanted to, he'd need a guide who knows the territory, and there aren't many of those around." Rowan reloaded and handed the gun back. "Focus on the fundamentals. Speed comes later." They practiced until noon, breaking only when Evelyn's hands were too sore to grip the revolver properly. By the end, she'd managed to hit a target twice out of 20 shots. Not exactly impressive, but better than nothing. "We'll practice every day until we go back," Rowan said as they walked back to the cabin. "By the time you're done, you'll at least be able to defend yourself if you have to." "What about you?" Evelyn asked. "Where'd you learn all this?" "The war, mostly. Joined up when I was 17, fought for the Union in Missouri and Arkansas. Learned real fast that being good with a gun meant staying alive." He glanced at her. "Not something I'm proud of, but it's the truth." "You fought in the war?" Evelyn tried to reconcile that with the man walking beside her.
How old are you? 36. I know. I look older. He smiled without humor. War does that. They spent the afternoon working around the cabin, Rowan checking the roof for leaks while Evelyn sorted through the food supplies and tried to plan meals that wouldn't drive them both mad with boredom. It was mundane work, almost domestic, and Evelyn found herself relaxing into it.
That night they ate beans and salt pork, and Rowan taught her how to clean and maintain the revolver. His hands were steady and sure as he showed her how to disassemble the cylinder, how to clean the barrel, how to check for wear on the firing pin. A gun that's not maintained is more dangerous to you than to anyone else, he said. Misfire at the wrong moment and you're dead. Cheerful thought. Important thought. Rowan handed her a cloth. Here, you try. Evelyn worked through the process slowly, aware of his eyes on her hands. It was strange, this casual intimacy of learning. Strange, but not uncomfortable. Rowan had a way of teaching that didn't make her feel stupid for not knowing things. He just showed her and waited for her to get it right. You're a good teacher, she said without thinking. Had practice. Taught Emma to ride and shoot before... He stopped himself. Before things went bad. Evelyn wanted to ask more about his sister, but the pain in his voice made her hesitate. Some wounds were too fresh to prod, even years later. Instead, she said, Tell me about the ranch. How long have you had it? Rowan seemed relieved by the change of subject. Bought the land 6 years ago with money I saved from army pay and some work I did as a scout. It wasn't much at first, just a few acres and a half-collapsed cabin, but I built it up piece by piece. Mateo joined me 4 years back, and between us we've made it into something worth having. How'd you meet Mateo? He was working on a cattle drive passing through the territory. Had some trouble with the boss. Disagreement over pay, as I understand it. They left him in Helena with nothing but the clothes on his back. Rowan smiled at the memory. I was in town selling horses and saw him arguing with the trail boss. Man had 20 pounds on Mateo and a gun, but Mateo wasn't backing down. I respected that. Offered him work on the spot. And he just said yes. He asked what the pay was first. When I told him, he asked if I was good for it. I said yes. He said he'd give me a month to prove it. Rowan's smile widened. Been there ever since. Evelyn could hear the affection in his voice, the respect. You trust him a lot. With my life, he saved it more than once. Rowan stood and stretched, his back cracking. I'm going to do a perimeter check before dark. You should get some rest. I'm fine. You're not. You're exhausted and trying to hide it. His voice was gentle but firm. Rest, Evelyn. That's an order. She wanted to argue, but the truth was her whole body ached and the idea of lying down sounded like heaven. So she climbed to the loft and stretched out on the narrow bed, listening to Rowan move around below. Sleep came easier this time, and her dreams were less haunted. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for shooting practice, Evelyn slowly improving until she could hit a target half the time. Afternoons were for other survival skills, how to start a fire without matches, how to read weather signs in the sky, how to move quietly through the forest. Rowan taught her to track animals, showed her which plants were safe to eat and which would make her sick. You're learning fast, he said on the third day as they followed deer tracks through a pine grove. Faster than most people I've taught. I'm motivated. Evelyn knelt to examine a depression in the soft earth. 3 deer, right? And they passed through here maybe an hour ago? Close. 2 deer and a fawn, and closer to 2 hours. He pointed to the way the disturbed pine needles had settled. But you're getting the hang of it. They spent that afternoon fishing in a creek about a mile from the cabin, and Evelyn caught her first trout with a makeshift line and hook. It wasn't much, barely 6 inches, but she felt an absurd surge of pride when she pulled it from the water. Rowan laughed at her expression. You'd think you'd just landed a whale. It's my whale, Evelyn said, grinning. I caught it, and you can't have any. Fair enough. I'll catch my own damn whale. They cooked the fish that night over an open fire outside the cabin, and for the first time since the auction, Evelyn felt something close to happiness. Not the innocent happiness of her childhood, before fever and death and betrayal. Something harder won and more precious for it. That night, sitting by the fire with coffee in her hands and the smell of pine smoke in her hair, Evelyn looked across at Rowan and said, Thank you. He glanced up from the stick he was whittling. For what? For giving me this. These days, a chance to learn how to be strong instead of just surviving. She struggled to find the right words. For treating me like a person instead of something broken that needs fixing. Rowan set down his knife and stick. You were never broken, Evelyn. Hurt, yes. Traumatized, absolutely. But not broken. Broken things can't fight back the way you did. I didn't fight back, You survived when it would have been easier to give up. You kept your wits when men were bidding on you like livestock. You threw a skillet at armed raiders. He smiled slightly. That's not broken. That's steel. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. No one had ever described her that way before. Stubborn, maybe. Difficult sometimes. But never strong. I don't feel like steel, she admitted. Nobody does. That's the secret. Rowan picked up his whittling again. We're all just doing the best we can and hoping it's enough. Movement in the darkness beyond the firelight made them both freeze. Rowan's hand went to his gun in one smooth motion, and Evelyn's followed, slower, less practiced, but there. A figure stepped into the light, hands raised. Easy, Mateo's voice called. It's me. Rowan relaxed but didn't holster his weapon. You're early. What happened? Mateo looked tired, his clothes dusty from hard riding. We need to talk inside. They moved into the cabin, and Mateo accepted the coffee Evelyn poured for him with a grateful nod. He drank half of it before speaking. I got the federal marshal and Helena interested, he said. Showed him the barn, the wounded man's testimony, everything. He's willing to investigate Crow. That's good, Rowan said. So what's the problem? The problem is Crow didn't wait around for the law to find him. He left Red Hollow 2 days ago with 6 men, headed into the mountains. Mateo looked at Evelyn, then back to Rowan. He's tracking you. The cabin went silent. Evelyn felt ice slide down her spine. How close? Rowan asked quietly. Day and a half behind me, maybe less. I covered my trail as best I could, but if they've got a decent tracker, they'll find this place eventually. Rowan stood and started gathering supplies. How long until the marshal can move? He's organizing a posse now. 3, maybe 4 days before they can get into the mountains. We don't have 4 days. Rowan looked at Evelyn. Pack everything you need for travel. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Where are we going? Evelyn asked, already moving toward her few belongings. There's a settlement about 8 hours north of here, too far for Crow to track in one push, and close enough to the Canadian border that he'll think twice about starting trouble. Rowan was loading rifles, checking ammunition. We hole up there until the marshal can deal with this properly. Mateo shook his head. I don't like running. Neither do I, but I like getting Evelyn killed even less. Rowan handed him a rifle. You with us or heading back to the ranch? With you, always. Mateo drained his coffee and stood. Let me get my horse ready. They moved with practiced efficiency, and within 15 minutes they were mounted and moving through the darkness. Rowan led on Sirocco with Evelyn behind him, while Mateo followed on his own horse, a tough little paint that looked like it could climb vertical walls if asked. The trail north was rougher than anything they'd traveled before, barely more than a game path in places, winding between boulders and along cliff edges that made Evelyn's stomach churn. She held tight to Rowan's waist and tried not to look down at the drops yawning beside them. They rode through the night without stopping, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and anyone following. By dawn, they were high enough that snow lingered in the shadows, and Evelyn's breath misted in the air. How are you holding up? Rowan asked as they paused to rest the horses. I'm fine, Evelyn said automatically, then reconsidered. Actually, I'm terrified, but I'm still moving, so I guess that's something. That's everything, Mateo said from where he stood watch. Terror that keeps you moving is just another name for courage. They pushed on as the sun climbed higher, following ridgelines that offered long views of the country behind them. Evelyn kept watching those views, looking for signs of pursuit. For the first few hours, she saw nothing. Then, just past noon, she spotted something. Rowan, she said quietly. Behind us. 3, maybe 4 miles back. He turned in the saddle to look. After a moment, he cursed softly. 6 riders, he said, coming fast. It's him, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. Rowan urged Sirocco forward at a faster pace, and they moved from a walk to a trot, the horses picking their way carefully over the rocky ground. But the riders behind them were gaining. They had fresher horses or better knowledge of the terrain or just more desperation. Within an hour, the gap had closed to less than 2 miles. "We're not going to outrun them," Matteo said grimly. "No," Rowan agreed. He scanned the landscape ahead, then pointed to a narrow defile between 2 rock walls. "There. We can defend that if we have to." They reached the defile with maybe 20 minutes to spare and dismounted, leading the horses through the narrow gap to where it widened into a small box canyon. Good cover, but only one way out. "Could be a trap," Matteo observed. "Could be our best chance." Rowan handed Evelyn a rifle. "Remember what I taught you. Aim for center mass, don't waste shots, and stay behind cover." Evelyn took the rifle with shaking hands. 3 days of practice hadn't prepared her for this, hadn't prepared her to point a weapon at a human being and pull the trigger. But she'd meant what she'd said at the ranch. She was done running, done being helpless. If Silas Crow wanted her back, he'd have to go through her to get it. They positioned themselves behind a tumble of boulders near the mouth of the defile, rifles ready. Rowan took the center position with the best sight line down the approach. Matteo moved to the left flank, where he could cover the high ground. That left Evelyn on the right, wedged between 2 rocks, with barely enough room to bring her rifle to bear. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Breathe," Rowan said without looking at her, "just like we practiced. In through your nose, out through your mouth, slow and steady." Evelyn tried, but her lungs felt too small. The weight of the rifle seemed enormous in her grip, and her finger kept drifting toward the trigger when it should have stayed alongside the guard. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "You can." Rowan's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "And you will, because the alternative is worse. Focus on that." The sound of hoofbeats echoed off the rock walls, getting closer. Evelyn pressed herself flatter against the stone and tried to remember everything Rowan had taught her. Sight picture, trigger squeeze, follow-through. Simple concepts that felt impossible now that actual lives hung in the balance. The riders appeared at the far end of the defile. 6 men on horseback, just as Matteo had said. Even at this distance, Evelyn recognized Silas Crow's bulk in the lead, his face red and sweating beneath his hat. The scarred man who'd stopped him in Red Hollow rode at his right hand, and the others looked like hard cases, the kind of men who'd kill for money and sleep fine afterward. They stopped about 100 yards out, clearly wary of the narrow passage. "Mercer," Crow's voice boomed off the rocks. "I know you're in there. Send out the girl, and we'll call this square." Rowan didn't answer, didn't move. He just waited, rifle steady against his shoulder. "I'm a reasonable man," Crow continued. "You made a mistake back in Red Hollow, but mistakes can be forgiven. Just give me what's mine and ride away." "She's not yours," Rowan called back. "Never was. Never will be. The law says different. I had the winning bid before you interfered. The law says you hired men to burn my property and threaten my life. Federal marshal's on his way to sort that out. You want to wait for him, or you want to turn around and ride while you still can?" Crow laughed, the sound ugly and mocking. "Marshall's 3 days away at least. Lot can happen in 3 days." He shifted in his saddle, and his hand moved toward his gun belt. "Last chance, Mercer. Send her out." "Come and get her." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then Crow drew his pistol, and the world exploded into violence. The first shots came from Crow's men, wild and hasty, kicking up stone chips and dust. Rowan fired back with precision, his rifle cracking once. A man screamed and fell from his horse. The other riders scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and scrub brush. Matteo fired twice in quick succession from his position. Evelyn saw one of the riders stumble, clutching his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. "Evelyn," Rowan shouted, "pick a target and fire." She tried. She raised the rifle and sighted on a man taking cover behind a boulder 40 yards away. Her finger found the trigger, but when she started to squeeze, her hand shook so badly the barrel wavered. This wasn't target practice. This was a human being. If she pulled this trigger, she might kill someone. The man she'd been aiming at popped up and fired. The bullet struck the rock 6 inches from Evelyn's head, spraying her face with stone fragments. She jerked back, gasping. "Shoot!" Rowan yelled. "Evelyn, shoot or get down!" She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, and the shot went wide, missing by yards. But it was enough to make the man duck back into cover. Gunfire rattled back and forth across the defile. The air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burnt powder. Evelyn worked the lever action, chambered another round, fired again. Still too wild, but closer this time. "Covering fire!" Mateo shouted. "They're trying to flank right." Evelyn looked and saw two men attempting to work their way up the slope to her side, using the terrain for cover. If they got above her position, she'd be completely exposed. Rowan swung his rifle toward them and fired twice. One man went down hard, the other scrambled back down the slope, abandoning the attempt. But while Rowan was focused on the flankers, Crow and the scarred man had moved forward, cutting the distance in half. They were close enough now that Evelyn could see Crow's face clearly, twisted with rage and something uglier. Possession. The look of a man who'd decided something belonged to him and wouldn't accept otherwise. "You should have stayed in Red Hollow, sweetheart," Crow yelled. "Would have been easier for everyone." Evelyn fired at him without thinking, pure instinct overriding fear. The bullet struck the rock Crow was hiding behind, close enough that he flinched back. "That all you got?" Crow taunted. "Can't even shoot straight?" Anger surged through Evelyn's chest, hot and clarifying. This bastard had chased her across half the territory, had sent men to burn Rowan's home, had treated her like property to be bought and sold and reclaimed at will. She was done being afraid of him. Evelyn chambered another round, took a breath the way Rowan had taught her, and aimed carefully. When Crow leaned out to fire again, she squeezed the trigger. The bullet caught him in the upper arm. Not a killing shot, but he screamed and dropped his pistol, clutching at the wound. Blood seeped between his fingers. "You shot me!" Crow's voice was shocked, almost offended. "You actually shot me!" "And I'll do it again," Evelyn shouted back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Leave us alone!" The scarred man grabbed Crow and dragged him back toward where they'd left the horses. The other men, seeing their boss wounded and bleeding, started to retreat as well. "This isn't over," Crow yelled as they hauled him onto his horse. "You hear me, Mercer? This isn't over." But they were riding away, disappearing back down the trail in a cloud of dust and defeat. Silence fell over the defile like a blanket. Evelyn's ears rang from the gunfire, and her hands shook worse than before, but it was done. They'd won. She lowered the rifle and realized she was crying. Not from fear exactly, though there was some of that, more from the sheer overwhelming reality of what had just happened. She'd shot a man, had aimed a weapon at another human being and pulled the trigger with intent to harm. "Evelyn?" Rowan's voice, gentle now. He was beside her, easing the rifle from her grip. "Hey, look at me." She looked. His face was streaked with powder burns and dust, but his eyes were steady. "You did good," he said. "You held your ground, and you fought back. That took courage." "I was terrified." "Everyone is. That's what makes it courage." He helped her stand, and her legs nearly buckled. "Come on, we need to move before they regroup." Mateo was already checking the two downed riders. One was clearly dead. Rowan's first shot had caught him square in the chest. The other was unconscious from blood loss, but still breathing. "What do we do with him?" Mateo asked. Rowan looked at the wounded man for a long moment. "Bandage him and leave him water. When the marshal comes through, he'll find him. If he lives that long, he can answer questions." "That's more mercy than he deserves," Mateo said, but he was already pulling bandages from his pack. They worked quickly, patching the worst of the man's wounds and propping him in the shade where he'd have a chance. Then they mounted up and rode out, putting distance between themselves and the defile. Evelyn rode in silence, her mind replaying the firefight over and over. The sight of Crow's blood, the look on his face when she'd shot him, the knowledge that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. They made camp that night in a pine grove high enough that they could see miles of territory below. No fire, too risky, just cold rations and water. Rowan set watches, Mateo taking first shift while Rowan and Evelyn tried to rest. But Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat with her back against a tree trunk, staring at her hands in the moonlight. They looked the same as always, but she felt like they should look different, like shooting someone should leave a mark. "Can't sleep either?" Rowan's voice came from the darkness nearby. "No." He moved closer, settling against the tree beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not touching, giving her space. "First time's always the hardest," he said quietly. "Taking a shot at someone, seeing the blood, knowing you caused that. Does it get easier?" "Not easier, just different. You learn to live with it." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Crow would have killed all three of us if he'd gotten the chance.
I know. Evelyn struggled to articulate what she was feeling. I always thought I was a good person, someone who wouldn't hurt anyone. And now I know that's not true. I can hurt people. I will hurt people if they threaten what matters to me. That doesn't make you a bad person, Rowan said. Just a real one. Good people don't stand by while evil happens. Sometimes protecting what matters means getting blood on your hands.
Evelyn looked at him. Is that what you tell yourself? About the war? About everything you've done? Sometimes. Other times I lie awake wondering if I'm fooling myself. He smiled without humor. Being human means carrying contradictions. You live with them or they eat you alive. How do you live with them? Rowan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I try to do more good than harm. Try to protect people who can't protect themselves. Try to build something instead of just destroying. Some days that's enough. Other days it isn't, and I have to accept that too. Evelyn thought about the ranch, about the horses and cattle, and the life Rowan had built from nothing, about the $3,000 he'd spent to buy a stranger's freedom, about the way he'd risked everything to keep her safe from men who wanted to use her. You're a good man, she said. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you better than you think. Evelyn shifted to face him more directly. I've seen how you treat people, how you treat animals, how you've treated me. That says more than words ever could. Rowan met her eyes, and something passed between them in the moonlight. An understanding, maybe. A recognition that they'd both been shaped by violence and loss, but hadn't let it break them. Thank you, he said finally, for what you did back there, for standing your ground instead of panicking. Mateo and I would have been overrun if you hadn't covered the flank. I didn't do much, just fired wildly and got lucky. You wounded Crow badly enough to take the fight out of him. That's not luck, that's skill under pressure. Rowan smiled slightly. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for. Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. Being seen like that, as strong, as capable, meant more than any flowery compliment ever could. Get some sleep, Rowan said, standing. We've got a long ride tomorrow. Where are we going now? Back to the ranch. He offered her his hand and pulled her to her feet. Crow's wounded, and his men are scattered. The marshal should be in the territory by now. We'll meet him there, give statements, and finish this properly. You think it's really over? The running part is. The rest, Rowan shrugged. We'll deal with it as it comes. Evelyn nodded and moved to her bedroll. This time, when she lay down, sleep came easier. Not peaceful exactly, but possible. She woke to Mateo shaking her shoulder. Dawn was just breaking, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. We need to move, he said quietly. Now. Evelyn sat up, instantly alert. What's wrong? Riders. At least 8, maybe 10, coming from the south. Mateo was already packing gear. Could be the marshal's posse, could be reinforcements for Crow. Either way, we don't want to get caught between them. They broke camp in minutes and rode hard to the north, following ridge lines that offered cover but slow going. Behind them, Evelyn could occasionally glimpse the riders, too far away to make out details, but definitely tracking. By midday, they'd put a few miles between themselves and pursuit, but the horses were laboring. Sirocco, carrying double weight, was breathing hard. Mateo's paint looked ready to drop. We need to rest them, Mateo said. Another hour at this pace and they'll go lame. Rowan scanned the terrain ahead. There, that creek valley. We can water the horses and see anyone approaching from either direction. They descended into the valley and found a spot where the creek widened into a shallow pool. The horses drank greedily while Rowan climbed a boulder to keep watch. I can't see them anymore, he called down. Either they gave up or they're being more careful. My money's on more careful, Mateo said. He was checking his paint's hooves, frowning at what he found. She's got a stone bruise. We push her much harder and she'll come up lame for sure. Rowan climbed down, his expression grim. How long does she need? A day? Maybe 2. We don't have a day. Rowan looked at Evelyn. Can you ride alone? I think so. Why? Because if we're going to make it back to the ranch before whoever's following catches up, we need to move faster. That means you on Mateo's horse, Mateo riding double with me. They rearranged themselves, and Evelyn found herself in the saddle of the tough little paint. The horse snorted and shifted beneath her, testing her, but Evelyn held the reins steady and the animal settled. Talk to her, Matteo advised. She's temperamental, but she responds to a calm voice. Evelyn leaned forward and stroked the paint's neck. Easy, girl. We're friends now. Just get me home and I'll give you all the oats you can eat. The horse's ears swiveled back, listening. They rode on, moving faster now that the weight was more evenly distributed. The landscape gradually became more familiar. Evelyn recognized landmarks from the journey out. That oddly shaped peak, the split pine tree struck by lightning, the valley where they'd stopped to rest on the first day. Home. The thought surprised her. When had she started thinking of the ranch as home? It had only been a couple of weeks since Rowan had pulled her off that auction platform, but somewhere in the chaos and fear and learning, the place had burrowed into her chest and taken root. Late afternoon brought them within sight of the ranch. Evelyn's heart lifted at the sight of the main house, the rebuilt barn. Matteo must have been working on repairs before he came to find them, the familiar corrals and pastures. But something was wrong. Smoke rose from the chimney, which was normal, but there were too many horses in the corral, at least a dozen, maybe more. Rowan reined in and studied the scene. That's not right. Could be the marshal and his posse, Matteo suggested. Or it could be Crow's men waiting for us. Rowan's hand moved to his rifle. We go in careful. Stay behind me. They approached slowly, spreading out to make themselves harder targets. As they got closer, Evelyn could see men moving around the ranch yard, too many to count from this distance. A figure stepped out onto the porch of the main house, and Evelyn's breath caught. The man wore a badge that glinted in the late afternoon sun. Tall, gray-haired, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades enforcing the law in hard country. That's Marshal Dawson, Matteo said, relief evident in his voice. From Helena. They rode into the yard, and the marshal raised a hand in greeting. Mr. Mercer, Mr. Reyes, and you must be Miss Hart. Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. We've been waiting for you, Dawson continued. Got here yesterday with my men, found your ranch in, well, let's say it had seen some excitement. Did you find Silas Crow? Rowan asked as he dismounted. We did indeed. Caught up with him about 20 miles south of here, wounded and trying to get back to Red Hollow. He and 4 of his men are currently sitting in my wagon, shackled and ready for transport to Helena. Dawson's smile was grim. He wasn't happy about it, but that's not my concern. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. It was really over. Crow was caught. She was safe. What about charges? Rowan asked. Arson, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. We've got statements from the man you left tied up after the first raid, plus testimony from several residents of Red Hollow who witnessed the auction and subsequent threats. Dawson pulled out a notebook. I'll need statements from all 3 of you as well, but based on what I've heard so far, Crow's looking at 10 to 15 years in territorial prison. His men will get less, but they're going away too. And Miss Hart? Rowan's voice was careful. Is she free and clear? Dawson looked at Evelyn. As far as the law is concerned, that auction was illegal. Human trafficking, pure and simple. You were never legally sold, Miss Hart, which means you owe nothing to anyone. You're free to go wherever you please. Free. The word should have filled her with joy, but instead Evelyn just felt tired and uncertain. Thank you, Marshal, she said quietly. Thank Mr. Mercer. He's the one who made the formal complaint and pushed this investigation through channels that would rather have ignored it. Dawson tipped his hat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get my prisoners settled for the night. We'll take statements in the morning and head out by noon. He walked off toward where his men had set up camp near the barn. Evelyn watched him go, then looked at Rowan. You filed a formal complaint? When? Sent it with Matteo when he went to Helena. Rowan was already unsaddling Sirocco. Figured we needed the law on our side officially, not just hoping they'd show up if things went bad. You didn't tell me. Didn't want to get your hopes up until I knew it would work. He pulled the saddle off and started rubbing down the horse with practiced motions. Besides, you had enough to worry about. Evelyn wanted to argue with him about keeping things from her, but she was too exhausted. Instead, she just helped Matteo settle the paint, making sure the mare got extra grain as promised. That night they ate with the marshal and his men, a welcome change from trail rations. The conversation was easy, mostly the marshal's men trading stories about tough cases and close calls.
Evelyn sat between Rowan and Mateo, listening and occasionally contributing when asked a direct question.
She was safe, truly safe, for the first time in weeks. The thought should have brought relief, but instead it brought questions. What now? Where did she go from here? The marshal had said she was free to go wherever she pleased, but where did she please to go? California? To an aunt she barely knew? Back east to a city that held nothing but bad memories? Or stay here, in this rough country where she'd learned to shoot and track and stand her ground against men who wanted to break her? After dinner, Evelyn excused herself and walked out toward the corrals. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. She leaned against the fence and watched the horses dozing in the moonlight, footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Rowan. "Big day tomorrow," he said, joining her at the fence. "Give your statement to the marshal, watch them take Crow away. Then you can start figuring out what comes next." "What if I don't know what comes next?" "Then you take your time figuring it out. No rush." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "The offer still stands, you know. You can stay here as long as you want. Work if you want to work, rest if you need to rest. No pressure either way." Evelyn turned to look at him. His face was half in shadow, but she could see the sincerity in his expression. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked. "And don't say it's because of your sister. I know that's part of it, but there's something more." Rowan took a long breath and let it out slowly. "You want the truth?" "Always." "Because somewhere in the middle of teaching you to shoot and watching you stand your ground against impossible odds, I started to care about you, not as a project or a debt to repay or a chance at redemption." He met her eyes directly. "As a person I respect. Someone I want in my life, if you'll have me in yours." Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. This was dangerous territory. Feelings, attachments, the possibility of being hurt again. Every instinct told her to step back, to protect herself. But she'd spent the last few weeks learning that safety wasn't the same as living, that sometimes you had to risk pain to find something worth keeping. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "I didn't want to. Tried not to, actually, but you make it very difficult to keep my distance." Rowan's mouth quirked into a smile. "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation." Evelyn moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I don't know what I'm doing, Rowan. I don't know if I'm ready for anything beyond friendship, but I know I want to stay and find out." "That's enough," Rowan said. "More than enough." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. They stood like that for a long time, just holding hands under the stars, while the night wind whispered through the pines and the horses dozed in the corral, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. Tomorrow, the marshal would take her statement. Tomorrow, Crow would be hauled off to face justice. Tomorrow, the future would start to take shape. But tonight, Evelyn just stood next to a man who'd risked everything to give her freedom, and let herself feel something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. The morning came too quickly. Evelyn woke in the small room that had become hers, the one with the lock on the inside of the door, though she hadn't used it in days, and dressed in clean clothes Mateo had somehow acquired during his trip to Helena. They fit better than Rowan's cast-offs, and she was grateful for the small dignity of proper clothing. She found Rowan and Mateo already up, drinking coffee with the marshal on the porch. They made space for her, and Mateo poured her a cup without being asked. "Sleep well?" Marshal Dawson asked. "Well enough?" Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm tin cup. "When do you want my statement?" "Whenever you're ready, no rush." But his eyes said otherwise. He wanted to get moving, get his prisoners back to Helena, where they could be properly charged and tried. Evelyn gave her statement in the main room, the marshal writing everything down in his careful hand. She told him about Samuel's death, about the wagon and the men who'd captured her, about the auction and everything that followed. Some of it was hard to say out loud, but Dawson listened without judgment, just nodding occasionally and asking clarifying questions. When she was done, he set down his pen and looked at her with something like respect. "You've been through hell, Miss Hart. Most people wouldn't have survived what you did with their spirit intact. You should be proud of that." "I'm just glad it's over." "It is. And for what it's worth, the law failed you when those men weren't stopped before they got you to Red Hollow. I'm sorry for that." Dawson stood and offered his hand. But we've got them now, and they'll pay for what they did. I'll make sure of it personally." Evelyn shook his hand, feeling the strength of his grip. "Thank you, Marshal." Within the hour, Dawson and his men were packed and ready to move out. Evelyn watched from the porch as they loaded Crow and his men into the prison wagon. Crow's arm was bandaged. Her bullet had gone clean through, the marshal had told her, and his face was pale with pain and fury. He saw her watching and spat in her direction. "This isn't over, you hear me? I've got friends in Helena, money. I'll be out in a year, and when I am—" One of the marshal's men clipped him across the back of the head. "Shut up, Crow. You're done talking." They locked the wagon and mounted up. The marshal tipped his hat to Rowan. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Mercer. If we need anything else, I'll send word." "Appreciated, Marshal." The posse rode out, the prison wagon creaking and swaying on the rough road. Evelyn watched until they disappeared over the ridge, taking Silas Crow and all his threats with them. "You all right?" Rowan asked quietly. Evelyn realized she was crying, not from sadness, but from relief so profound it hurt. "Yeah, I'm all right. I think I'm actually all right." Rowan put his arm around her shoulders, a brief, careful gesture, and she leaned into it, accepting the comfort. Mateo cleared his throat from the doorway. "I hate to interrupt, but we've got work to do. That barn isn't going to finish rebuilding itself." Rowan laughed. "Ever the romantic, Mateo." Romance doesn't repair fence posts. But Mateo was smiling. "Come on, both of you. Time to get back to living." They spent the rest of the day working around the ranch. Evelyn helped Mateo sort through supplies that had been damaged in the fire, salvaging what they could and making lists of what needed replacing. Rowan worked on the barn, the sound of his hammer echoing across the valley. It was good, honest work, the kind that made your muscles ache but your mind quiet. By the time the sun started to sink toward the western peaks, Evelyn felt more centered than she had in weeks. That evening, they ate dinner together in the main house. Mateo's cooking this time, which was significantly better than either Rowan's or Evelyn's. They talked about plans for the ranch, about stock they needed to buy, about whether to expand the horse operation or stick with cattle. Normal conversation, normal concerns, a normal life. Evelyn caught herself smiling and realized that this was what she wanted. Not excitement or adventure or even safety in the abstract. Just this, good people, honest work, a place where she belonged. After dinner, Rowan walked her out to watch the sunset. They stood by the corral again. It was becoming their spot, she realized, and watched the sky turn from blue to gold to deep purple. "I meant what I said last night," Rowan said, "about wanting you in my life. But I want you to know there's no pressure. You stay because you want to, not because you think you owe me anything." "I know." Evelyn turned to face him fully. "And I want to stay. Not just for a few weeks while I figure things out. I want to stay and learn this life. Learn to run a ranch, manage stock, all of it. I want to build something here." Rowan's expression softened. "With me? With you. And Mateo. And whoever else ends up part of this place." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I'm not ready for everything yet. I'm still healing, still figuring out who I am after everything that happened. But I know I want to do that here, with you." "I can wait," Rowan said, "however long it takes." They stood together as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge. Somewhere in the valley below, a wolf howled. The horses in the corral shifted and nickered softly. The wind carried the scent of pine and sage and wood smoke. Evelyn breathed it all in and felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace. She wasn't sure she'd ever have that completely. But something close, something real. She'd been sold like property, chased across the territory by men who thought they owned her, forced to fight for her life and her freedom. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd found a place where she could be strong, where her scars were acknowledged but didn't define her, where she could choose her own path forward. And standing here with Rowan's hand in hers, looking out over a valley that was starting to feel like home, Evelyn understood something fundamental. Freedom wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the presence of choice. The ability to decide not just where to go, but who to become. She'd made her choice. The rest would come in time. The first snow came early that year, dusting the peaks in mid-October and reminding everyone that winter in the Montana Territory didn't wait for convenient timing. Evelyn woke to find frost covering the window of her room, intricate patterns like lace spread across the glass. She dressed quickly in the heavy wool clothes Rowan had bought for her on his last trip to Helena, proper ranch gear now, not borrowed hand-me-downs, and climbed down to find the main room already warm with fire. Rowan stood at the stove, frying eggs and salt pork, and the domestic normalcy of it still caught her off guard sometimes. 3 months. She'd been at the ranch for 3 months now, and the rhythms of this life had seeped into her bones like the cold. Up before dawn, work until your hands ached, eat whatever Mateo or Rowan managed to cook, sleep hard and dreamlessly in a bed that had become truly hers. "Morning," Rowan said without turning around. He'd developed an uncanny ability to know when she entered a room. "Coffee's ready." Evelyn poured herself a cup and stood by the window, watching the sun break over the eastern ridges. The valley was beautiful in this light, all gold and shadow, the frost glittering like scattered diamonds. "Mateo says we need to bring the cattle down from the high pasture before the next storm hits," Rowan continued, sliding eggs onto 2 plates. "That's a full day's work, maybe 2. You up for it?" "Of course." Evelyn took the plate he offered. The question irritated her slightly, not because he'd asked, but because part of her wondered if he still saw her as fragile. "I've done harder rides than that." "I know, just checking." Rowan sat across from her. "You've been quiet the last few days. Wanted to make sure everything was all right." He wasn't wrong. Evelyn had been withdrawn, caught in a strange melancholy she couldn't quite name. The work helped, kept her hands busy, and her mind occupied. But in the quiet moments she felt something gnawing at her. "I got a letter yesterday," she said finally, "from my aunt in California." Rowan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I didn't know you'd written to her." "I did, about a month ago. Told her what happened, where I was. Asked if the offer to come live with her was still open." Evelyn pushed eggs around her plate. "She wrote back. Said, of course I'm welcome, that she's been worried sick, that she'll send money for passage whenever I'm ready to come." The silence that followed felt heavy. Rowan set down his fork carefully. "And are you ready to go?" "I don't know." Evelyn met his eyes. That was the plan, wasn't it? Come here, recover, then move on to California and start fresh. But now that it's actually possible, I can't seem to make myself want it. Then don't go. It's not that simple. She's family, the only family I have left. And she's offering me a real life, a house, stability, probably introductions to respectable men who'd want to marry me. The words tasted wrong in her mouth. Everything a woman's supposed to want. Is it what you want? Rowan's voice was carefully neutral, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders. She thought about San Francisco, about living in a proper house with servants and social calls and all the suffocating propriety her mother had tried to teach her, about being introduced to merchants and lawyers who'd see her as a suitable wife, someone to manage their household and bear their children and never mention the ugliness she'd survived. Then she thought about this valley, about waking to frost and coffee and the sound of horses in the corral, about work that left her exhausted but satisfied, about Rowan and Mateo and the life they'd carved from hard country through sheer stubborn will. "No," she said quietly, "it's not what I want, but maybe it's what I should want. Maybe I'm being selfish, staying here when I have other options. Choosing what makes you happy isn't selfish." Rowan reached across the table and took her hand. "If you want to go to California, I'll understand. I'll help you get there and wish you well. But if you're only going because you think you're supposed to, because it's the respectable thing or the safe thing, that's not a good enough reason. What if I'm just afraid?" The confession came out raw. "What if I only want to stay because this feels safe and I'm too scared to try anything else?" Then you stay until you're not scared anymore, or you stay forever if this is where you belong. Either way, it's your choice, nobody else's. Evelyn blinked back tears she didn't want to shed. This man had given her so much, freedom, safety, a place to rebuild herself, and asked for nothing in return. Even now, when she knew he wanted her to stay, he was offering to let her go. "I'm not going to California," she said. "Not now, maybe not ever. I'll write to my aunt and thank her, but I'm staying here. If you'll still have me." Rowan's face split into a smile that transformed him, made him look younger and lighter. "Always, for as long as you want." Mateo chose that moment to bang through the door, stamping snow off his boots. Are you two finished being disgustingly heartfelt? Because we've got cattle to move and weather coming in. Evelyn laughed, the melancholy lifting. We're finished. Good. Evelyn, saddle the paint. Rowan, get Sirocco ready and stop making moon eyes at each other. We're burning daylight. They rode out an hour later, the three of them spread across the slope to herd the cattle down from the high meadow. The work was cold and hard, the cattle stubborn about leaving the good grass, but Evelyn had learned the rhythms of this over the past months. She knew how to position her horse, how to read the lead cow's body language, when to push and when to let them move at their own pace. By midday, they had the herd moving steadily down valley. Evelyn's hands were numb inside her gloves, and her face stung from the wind, but she felt alive in a way she never had in St. Louis. This was real work, work that mattered, and she was good at it. You're a natural at this, Mateo called over the sound of hoofbeats and lowing cattle. Better than Rowan was when he started. That's not saying much, Rowan shouted back. I didn't know which end of a cow to point where. You still don't half the time. Their banter continued as they worked, and Evelyn found herself grinning despite the cold. This was family, she realized. Not the blood kind she'd been born into or the kind her aunt represented in California. The kind you built from shared work and trust, and the knowledge that these people would stand beside you when things went to hell. They got the cattle settled in the lower pasture by late afternoon and rode back to the ranch as the sun started its descent. Evelyn's whole body ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that came from accomplishment rather than suffering. That night after dinner, she sat at the table writing her response to her aunt, while Rowan and Mateo played cards by the fire. The letter was harder to compose than she'd expected. How did you explain to someone that you were choosing a rough ranch life over civilized comfort? That you'd rather freeze your fingers herding cattle than attend parties in San Francisco? In the end, she kept it simple. Thanked her aunt for the offer, explained that she'd found a place where she could be useful and build a life on her own terms. Promised to write regularly. She didn't mention Rowan, that felt too complicated to explain in a letter, but she hoped her aunt could read between the lines and understand. Done? Rowan asked when she sealed the envelope. Done. I'll ride to Helena next week and post it. We'll all go. Need to pick up winter supplies anyway. He set down his cards. Mateo had won again by the look of his satisfied smile, and stood. Walk with me? They stepped out into the cold night. The stars were brilliant overhead, the kind of clarity you only got at altitude when the air was clean and thin. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter and fell into step beside Rowan as they walked toward the corrals. I've been thinking, Rowan said after a moment, about expansion, about the future of this place. What kind of expansion? The valley to the west, the one with the old pine at the top. That land's unclaimed, or at least nobody's filed papers on it. I could homestead it, add another few hundred acres to what we've got. Run more cattle, maybe start breeding horses seriously instead of just keeping a few. He stopped and turned to face her. But that's a lot of work for 2 men. 3, counting you. We'd need to hire help, build more structures. It'd be a risk. Evelyn studied his face in the moonlight. But you want to do it. I do. I've been playing it safe for years, keeping the operation small enough that I could manage it alone if I had to. But now, he reached for her hand. Now I'm thinking about the future differently, thinking about building something that lasts beyond just me. Are you asking my opinion? I'm asking if you want to be part of it, not as a guest or a worker I'm helping out, as a partner. Someone who has equal say in how this ranch grows and what we build together. Evelyn's breath caught. Partnership. Not marriage. They hadn't gotten there yet, might never get there in any formal sense, but something equally binding. A commitment to build a life together, to share the risks and rewards. I don't have anything to contribute, she said. No money, no land, nothing but the work I can do. You contribute every day. You work as hard as anyone I've ever known. You've got ideas about how to run things better. I've heard you talking with Mateo about irrigation and winter feeding strategies, and you're the reason I'm thinking about expansion at all, instead of just keeping things small and safe. Rowan squeezed her hand. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you partnership because I think we'd build something better together than I ever could alone. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she wanted, not to be rescued or protected, but to be seen as an equal, to have her work and thoughts valued. Yes, she said. Yes, I want that. All of it. Rowan pulled her into a hug and Evelyn let herself lean into his strength. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other in the cold night air, while above them the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. When they finally pulled apart, Rowan said, "There's something else I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned before, but the timing never felt right." Evelyn tensed slightly. "What is it?" "The land I'm talking about claiming, the valley with the old pine. There's a reason I know it so well. I used to take Emma there when we were kids, before everything went wrong. It was her favorite place. She used to say when she grew up she'd build a house right at the top of that valley where she could see everything." Understanding dawned. "And you want to claim it for her?" "For her memory? Yeah. And for the future. She never got to build her house or her life, but maybe we can build something there that would make her proud. Something good growing from all that loss." His voice was rough with emotion. "Does that sound crazy?" "No." Evelyn touched his cheek gently. "It sounds like exactly the right thing to do." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they reached the door, Rowan hesitated. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. Evelyn's heart hammered. They'd been careful with each other these past months, respectful of boundaries and the fact that she was still healing from trauma. But standing here in the moonlight with the smell of pine smoke and the promise of a shared future, she wanted this, wanted him. "Yes," she whispered. Rowan leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and when their lips met it was gentle, careful. A question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Evelyn was smiling. "We should probably go inside before we freeze to death." "Probably." But Rowan kissed her once more before opening the door. Mateo looked up from his book when they entered, took one look at their faces, and smiled. "About time. I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other until spring." "Mind your own business," Rowan said, but he was grinning. "This is my business. I live here too, and your mooning affects productivity." Mateo closed his book. "But I'm happy for you both, truly." The weeks that followed were busy with preparation for winter and planning for the future. They rode to Helena and filed the homestead claim on the Western Valley. They bought supplies and equipment, spending carefully from the money Rowan had left after paying off debts from the barn fire. They hired a drifter named Jack Thornton to help with winter work, an older man with one bad leg and a steady disposition that Mateo approved of after a single conversation. Evelyn threw herself into the work with renewed purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore, or learning for the sake of learning. She was building something. Every fence post she helped set, every horse she trained, every decision she made about stock rotation or feed allocation, it all added up to a future she could see clearly. And through it all, her relationship with Rowan deepened, not quickly or dramatically, but in small moments. His hand on her back as they worked, the way he asked her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listened to her answers. The nights they sat by the fire talking about everything and nothing while Mateo pretended to ignore them. They kissed sometimes, but Evelyn wasn't ready for more and Rowan never pushed. He seemed content to let things develop at whatever pace she needed, and that patience meant more than any passionate declaration could have. Winter arrived in earnest in late November, bringing snow that piled 3 feet deep in the valleys and made travel anywhere beyond the immediate ranch impossible for days at a time. They settled into the rhythms of cold weather work, feeding stock, breaking ice on water troughs, maintaining equipment, and keeping the fires burning. One night in December, when a blizzard raged outside and the 4 of them, Rowan, Evelyn, Mateo, and Jack, were trapped inside together, Jack told stories about his years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. He'd seen the country change, he said, watched it go from true wilderness to something more settled. "You folks are part of that," he said, gesturing with his pipe. "Building something permanent in country that used to be just passing through. That means something. Or it means we're too stubborn to know when to quit," Mateo said. "Same thing in my experience," Jack smiled. "But I'll tell you what I've learned in 60-odd years. The people who make it out here aren't the ones without fear. They're the ones who are afraid but do the work anyway." Evelyn thought about that as she lay in bed that night, listening to the wind howl around the house. She was still afraid sometimes, afraid of strangers, afraid of sudden violence, afraid that the peace she'd found would be ripped away. But Jack was right. The fear didn't stop her from living. It just made her more careful, more appreciative of what she had. Christmas came quietly. They didn't have much in the way of celebration. No church, no big meal, No presents beyond practical items they'd needed anyway. But Mateo roasted a goose he'd traded for in Helena, and they ate well and played cards late into the night. Rowan gave Evelyn a knife in a tooled leather sheath, practical and beautiful, the kind of gift that showed he understood her. For when you're riding alone, he said, you should always have a good blade. Evelyn gave him a pair of gloves she'd sewn herself from leather and rabbit fur, her stitching clumsy but functional. Your old ones were falling apart. They're perfect, Rowan said, and the way he looked at her made her feel warm despite the cold. January brought the hardest weather yet, temperatures dropping so low that the horses' breath froze in their nostrils, and stepping outside felt like being slapped. They lost 2 cattle to the cold despite their best efforts, and Jack's bad leg pained him so much he could barely walk some mornings. But they endured. That's what you did in this country. You endured and you helped each other endure, and you didn't complain because complaining didn't make the cold any warmer. February brought the first break in the weather, a warm spell that melted some of the snow and reminded everyone that winter wouldn't last forever. Evelyn and Rowan rode out to check the stock in the lower pastures, just the 2 of them, leaving Mateo and Jack to handle work closer to home. They reached the old pine at the top of the western valley, Emma's Valley, as Evelyn had come to think of it, and dismounted to rest the horses. The tree was massive, probably 200 years old, twisted and weathered, but still alive. This is where we'll build, Rowan said, gesturing to the broad, flat area beneath the pine's branches. The house will go here, facing east to catch the morning sun, barn and outbuildings down the slope where there's better drainage. Evelyn could see it, a proper house, not just a cabin, room for a family, room for a future. Tell me about her, she said. About Emma. Not just what happened to her, but who she was. Rowan was quiet for a moment, staring out across the valley. When he spoke, his voice was soft with memory. She was stubborn, fierce, reminded me of you, actually. He smiled slightly. She hated being told she couldn't do something just because she was a girl. Used to follow me and my friends everywhere, demanding to be included. Learned to ride before she could properly walk, could outshoot most boys her age by the time she was 10. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she was also infuriating and reckless and too brave for her own good. Rowan's voice caught. The day the raiders came, she could have run, could have hidden, but she heard our mother scream and she ran toward the house instead of away. That's who she was, someone who ran toward danger when people she loved were threatened. Evelyn reached for his hand. I wish I could have known her. I think she would have liked you, would have respected what you survived and how you came through it. Rowan turned to look at her fully. I need to tell you something I've been carrying for months. What? When I saw you on that auction platform, it wasn't just about Emma or doing the right thing. It was about you specifically. The way you held yourself, scared but not broken, angry beneath the fear. The way you wouldn't look away even when those bastards were bidding on you like you were livestock. He cupped her face gently. I saw strength in you that day. Saw someone worth saving, not because you were helpless, but because you deserved better than what was happening to you. And every day since has proved I was right. Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks. I wasn't strong. I was terrified. You were both. That's what strength is, being terrified and staying standing anyway. Rowan wiped away her tears with his thumb. I love you, Evelyn. I've probably loved you since you threw that skillet through my window. But I need you to know I'm not confusing you with Emma or trying to replace what I lost. I love you for who you are, not who you remind me of. The words settled into Evelyn's chest like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she knew about herself. I love you too, she said. And saying it out loud made it real in a way thinking it hadn't. I didn't want to, tried not to, but somewhere between learning to shoot and helping you plan this expansion, I fell in love with you. Rowan kissed her then, deeper than before, and Evelyn kissed him back without reservation. The cold and the snow and the hard country all fell away until there was nothing but this. Two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their worst moments and chosen to build something better. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rowan said, "Marry me." Evelyn laughed. The sound startled out of her. What? Marry me? Not today, not tomorrow, but when you're ready. Be my wife and my partner and help me build this ranch into something that matters. He was grinning now,
looking younger and more hopeful than she'd ever seen him. I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring things out, but I'm sure about this. About you. About us. Evelyn's mind raced. Marriage. The word carried so much weight. Legal bonds, social expectations. The memory of women she'd known in St. Louis who'd married and disappeared into their husbands' lives like ghosts. But Rowan wasn't asking her to disappear. He was asking her to stay visible, to be a partner, to build something together as equals. Ask me again in the spring, she said finally. When we've survived the winter and started building in this valley. When I've had time to be sure this isn't just gratitude or dependence or anything else besides what it should be. Fair enough. Rowan didn't look disappointed. Spring it is. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. Evelyn felt lighter than she had in months, like some weight she'd been carrying had finally lifted. That night over dinner, Mateo announced he'd be leaving in the spring. The news hit like a physical blow. Evelyn set down her fork with a clatter. What? Why? My brother wrote to me. He's bought land in New Mexico territory and wants help getting it established. Family obligation. Mateo looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. I told him I'd come down for the summer at least, help him get started. But you'll come back? Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. Don't know yet. Depends on how things go down there, what he needs. Mateo met Rowan's eyes. I'm not abandoning you. I'll make sure you've got good help hired before I leave. But I need to do this. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and offered his hand. I understand, and I'm grateful for everything you've done here. You helped build this place as much as I did. They shook hands, and Evelyn saw the emotion both men were trying to hide. They'd been through hell together, had built something from nothing, and now that partnership was ending. But that was the way of things out here. She was learning. People came and went. Relationships shifted. The only constant was the land itself and what you chose to build on it. The rest of winter passed in a blur of work and planning. They hired 2 new hands to replace Mateo, younger men, eager and willing to learn. Evelyn taught them what she knew about the stock and the land, surprised to find she'd become knowledgeable enough to teach others. March brought the first real thaw, and with it the start of building in the Western Valley. They hauled lumber up from Helena, hired a carpenter from the settlement to the north, and began framing the new house beneath Emma's pine. Evelyn worked alongside the men, her hands blistering and her back aching, but she'd never been happier. This was hers, not given to her, not something she'd inherited, but something she was building with her own labor and sweat. One evening in early April, she and Rowan stood looking at the frame of the house, the skeleton of walls and roof outlined against the sunset. It's really happening, Evelyn said. We're actually doing this. We are. Rowan pulled her close. Think you're ready for that question I promised to ask again? Evelyn's heart skipped. Ask me. Evelyn Hart, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in building this life and this land and whatever comes next? She didn't hesitate. Yes. Rowan kissed her, and somewhere in the valley below, a wolf howled, greeting the spring. The sound that had once frightened her now felt like approval, like the wild country itself was accepting their claim to this place. They'd come through fire and violence and the coldest winter either had ever known. They'd survived when survival seemed impossible, and now they were building something that would last beyond them, something that would stand as proof that love and partnership could grow even in the hardest soil. Evelyn thought about the girl who'd stood on that auction platform, certain her life was over. That girl couldn't have imagined this, standing in the mountains with a ring of her own sweat and labor, promising herself to a man who saw her strength instead of her scars. But that girl had been wrong about so many things. Her life hadn't ended on that platform. It had just been waiting to begin. They were married on a Sunday in late May beneath the old pine tree, with wildflowers blooming across the valley and the new house standing half-finished behind them. The ceremony was simple. No church, no fancy dress, just Evelyn in a plain blue gown she'd bought in Helena and Rowan in his best shirt with his hair slicked back and still refusing to stay flat. The circuit preacher from the northern settlement performed the service, his voice competing with birdsong and the wind in the branches. Mateo stood as witness, along with Jack Thornton and the 2 new hands and a handful of neighbors who'd ridden in from surrounding ranches. Not a big crowd, but everyone who mattered. When the preacher asked if she took this man, Evelyn said, "I do," without hesitation.
When Rowan slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, bought with money from selling horses, he told her proudly. Her hand didn't shake. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher announced, and Rowan did, thoroughly enough that someone in the small crowd whistled. Evelyn laughed against his mouth, happier than she'd ever imagined possible. This was hers. This man, this land, this future they'd build together. Not given to her, not stolen from her, but chosen freely and fought for and earned through months of hard work and harder trust. The celebration afterward was modest but genuine. Mateo had somehow acquired whiskey good enough that it didn't strip paint, and someone produced a fiddle, and they danced on the grass beneath the pine while the sun tracked across the sky. Evelyn danced with Rowan, then with Mateo, then with Jack, whose bad leg meant they mostly just swayed in place while he told her terrible jokes. "You're good for him," Jack said quietly during one of those jokes. "Rowan, I mean. I've only known him a few months, but I can see the difference. You make him believe in things again." "He did the same for me," Evelyn said. "That's how it should work. Two people making each other better instead of worse." Jack smiled. "Hold on to that. Don't let the hard years steal it." It was good advice, though Evelyn didn't fully understand it yet. She would, though. Life had a way of teaching you things, whether you wanted to learn them or not. As evening fell and the guests began departing, Mateo pulled Rowan aside. Evelyn watched them talk, saw Mateo hand Rowan something, papers, looked like, and saw the emotion on both their faces. When Rowan came back, his eyes were red. "What was that about?" Evelyn asked. "Mateo signed over his share of the ranch, said it should all be ours, mine and yours together, since he's leaving." Rowan's voice was rough. "Wouldn't take payment for it either. Said 8 years of friendship was payment enough." Evelyn's throat tightened. She found Mateo checking his horse's saddle and threw her arms around him in a hug that surprised them both. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For helping save me, for teaching me, for accepting me here without question." Mateo returned the hug awkwardly. "You're easy to accept, and you're good for this place. For him." He pulled back and looked at her seriously. "Take care of each other. That's all that matters in the end." "We will." Mateo left the next morning, his saddlebags packed and his paint horse fresh. They all stood in the yard to see him off, Rowan, Evelyn, Jack, the two new hands. It felt like losing family, and Evelyn supposed it was. "All right," Mateo promised as he swung into the saddle. "Let you know how things are going in New Mexico. And who knows, maybe I'll come back someday. If you haven't turned the place into a palace by then." "We'll try to keep it rough just for you," Rowan said, and they gripped hands one last time. Then Mateo rode out, and the ranch felt different without him. Quieter, smaller somehow, even though the land was the same size as before. Life settled into new rhythms. Evelyn and Rowan moved into the half-finished house in the Western Valley, living in 2 completed rooms while work continued around them. It was chaotic and dusty and frequently frustrating, but it was theirs. Every nail driven, every board placed, was a choice they'd made together. The summer brought good weather and better grazing. The cattle put on weight, and the horses flourished. They hired another hand, a young man barely 18 named Thomas, who'd run away from an abusive father in Kansas and was grateful for work that didn't involve getting beaten. Evelyn saw something of herself in him, that desperate need to prove usefulness, to earn the safety he'd been given. "You're safe here," she told him one day when she caught him flinching at a raised voice. "Rowan doesn't hit, doesn't tolerate it either. You do good work, you'll be treated fair. That's the way this place runs." Thomas looked at her with something like wonder. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." She wanted to tell him not to call her ma'am, that she was barely older than he was, but she understood the formality was his way of creating distance from the chaos he'd left behind. So she let it be. In July, word came from Helena that Silas Crow had died in territorial prison. Pneumonia, the letter said, though there were whispers it had been a fight with another inmate that had gone wrong. Either way, the man who'd tried to own her was gone. Evelyn waited to feel something. Relief, maybe, or vindication. But mostly, she just felt tired. Crow's death didn't undo what he'd done. Didn't erase the fear or the auction platform or any of it. It was just an ending to something that had already ended months ago. "You all right?" Rowan asked when she showed him the letter. "Yeah, I think I am." Evelyn folded the paper and set it aside. "He doesn't matter anymore. Hasn't mattered for a long time. I just didn't realize it until now. That night, they sat on the porch of the unfinished house and watched lightning dance across the distant peaks. The summer storms were beautiful from a distance, violent and temporary, reminding Evelyn of how much had changed in a year. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been in Red Hollow that day? She asked Rowan.
All the time, but not in a wishful way. More like, he struggled for words, like I'm grateful the timing worked out the way it did. If I'd been a day earlier or later, if I'd taken a different route, if I'd decided not to go at all, you'd have ended up with Crow or someone worse, and I'd never have met you. So you believe in fate?
I believe in luck, good and bad, and I believe in making the most of whatever luck gives you.
Rowan took her hand. I got lucky the day I met you. Everything since has just been us choosing to build something with that luck. Evelyn thought about that as the storm moved closer, bringing the smell of rain on dust. Choice and luck, tangled together until you couldn't separate them. Maybe that was all life was, the circumstances you were given and what you decided to do with them. She'd been given violence and loss and fear. She'd chosen to survive, to learn, to build instead of breaking. That was enough. The house was finished by late August, just before the first hints of autumn began coloring the aspens. They held a second, smaller celebration, just the ranch hands and a few neighbors, to mark the completion. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid. Good logs, tight construction, windows that would keep out the winter cold. Room enough for a family, though neither of them had talked about that yet. One night in September, lying in their new bed in their new house, Rowan said, "I got a letter from the land office in Helena. The homestead claim is approved. This valley is officially ours." Emma's valley, Evelyn said softly. Ours and hers. Rowan rolled to face her in the darkness. "I never told you this, but the day we got married, I felt her here, like she was giving her approval somehow. That probably sounds crazy." "No. It sounds like love doesn't stop just because someone's gone. It changes shape, but it doesn't disappear." They lay in comfortable silence after that, and Evelyn thought about all the love she'd lost, her parents, Samuel, and how it had shaped her without destroying her. How Rowan had lost Emma, but channeled that loss into saving someone else. How pain could be transformed into something better if you had the courage to try. Winter came again, the second one Evelyn had spent in the Montana territory, but this time she was prepared. They had firewood stacked high, meat salted and stored, grain for the animals. The new house held heat better than the old cabin had, and with Rowan beside her every night, even the coldest days felt manageable. Thomas proved his worth that winter, working harder than anyone expected and learning fast. Jack's leg got worse with the cold, and he finally admitted he was getting too old for ranch work. They kept him on anyway, shifting his duties to things that didn't require riding or heavy labor. He was grateful in a way that made Evelyn's chest ache. "Most places would have let me go," he told her one morning. "Appreciate you folks seeing past what I can't do to what I can." "You've got knowledge and experience," Evelyn said. "That's worth more than a strong back." It was true, too. Jack knew things about weather and stock and land management that she and Rowan were still learning. His presence made them better ranchers. Spring arrived with the usual mud and chaos. They expanded the cattle operation, buying stock from a rancher to the south who was getting too old to manage his herd. They built a second barn closer to the new house. They broke ground on a root cellar and started planning for irrigation ditches that would let them cultivate hay in the bottomland. The work was endless, but Evelyn had learned to find satisfaction in that. There was always something that needed doing, which meant there was always purpose. Always a reason to get up before dawn and fall into bed exhausted. In May, a year after their wedding, Evelyn realized she was pregnant. She didn't tell Rowan right away. First she needed to be sure, and then she needed to figure out how she felt about it. A child meant vulnerability again, someone precious who could be threatened or lost. It meant her body wouldn't be entirely her own for months, and after fighting so hard to reclaim autonomy, that scared her. But it also meant continuity. A future that extended beyond just her and Rowan, someone to inherit what they were building. She finally told him on a Sunday afternoon while they were riding the western boundary, checking fence line. She just said it straight, no preamble. "I'm pregnant." Rowan pulled Sirocco to a halt and stared at her. Are you sure?" "Pretty sure, yeah. 3 months along, I think." 3 months?
And you're just now telling me? I needed time to think about it, about how I felt. Evelyn met his eyes. Are you angry?
Angry? No, I'm... Rowan dismounted and came to help her down from the paint, even though she didn't need help. I'm terrified and thrilled and about 6 other things I can't name. A baby. We're having a baby. You're okay with this? Okay with it. Evelyn, He stopped and seemed to really look at her. Are you okay with it? That's what matters. Evelyn thought about it honestly. I'm scared. Scared of being vulnerable again, scared of something happening to them, scared I'll be a terrible mother because of everything I've been through. But underneath the fear, I think I'm happy. I want this. Want to build a family with you. Rowan pulled her into a hug, and Evelyn let herself lean into his strength. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other while the horses grazed nearby and a hawk circled overhead. We'll figure it out together, Rowan said finally. Same as everything else. The pregnancy was hard. Evelyn was sick for weeks, couldn't keep food down, and the summer heat made everything worse. But she kept working as long as she could, refusing to be treated like she was fragile. Rowan worried constantly, which drove her crazy, until finally she snapped at him. I'm pregnant, not dying. Stop hovering. I'm not hovering, I'm being careful. You're smothering me. I need you to trust that I know my own limits. Evelyn softened her tone. I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but we can't live our lives wrapped in fear of what might go wrong. Rowan backed off after that, though she could tell it cost him, but he was trying, and that mattered. The baby was born on a frigid January night with a midwife from the northern settlement attending. Labor was brutal. 20 hours of pain that made Evelyn understand why women feared childbirth. There were moments she thought she'd die, moments she wanted to die just to make it stop. But when the midwife finally placed the baby in her arms, a girl, healthy and screaming, everything else fell away. She's perfect, Evelyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. Rowan stood beside the bed, looking pale and shaken. Are you all right? The midwife said there was a lot of blood. I'm fine. We're both fine. Evelyn looked down at her daughter's tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful. What should we name her? Emma, Rowan said without hesitation, if that's all right with you. Evelyn thought about the girl she'd never met, the sister Rowan had lost, the memory that had brought them to this valley. Emma Rose, she said, for your sister and my mother. Emma Rose Mercer opened her eyes then, dark blue and unfocused, and looked at her parents with the ancient wisdom newborns somehow possessed. Evelyn felt her heart crack open in a way she hadn't known was possible, a love so fierce it was almost frightening. This was vulnerability. This tiny person who depended on her completely, who she would die to protect. But it was also strength, the strength to love, despite knowing love meant risk. The first months were exhausting. Emma was a colicky baby, crying for hours every evening. Evelyn walked the floor until her feet ached, sang songs her mother had taught her, tried every remedy the midwife suggested. Nothing helped much, but she kept trying because that's what you did. Rowan helped when he could, but ranch work didn't stop for a newborn. There were still cattle to feed, horses to train, hands to supervise. So Evelyn learned to work with Emma strapped to her chest, the baby sleeping while she cooked or mended, or did the 100 other tasks that kept a household running. It was hard. Harder than anything except maybe those weeks after the auction, but it was also real in a way nothing else had been. This was life, messy and difficult and beautiful. Spring brought Mateo back. He rode into the yard one April morning looking tanned and dusty, and Evelyn nearly cried with joy at seeing him. New Mexico didn't take? Rowan asked as they embraced. It took fine. Helped my brother get established, just like I promised. But it's not home. Mateo looked around at the ranch, the new buildings, the expanded operation, everything that had changed. This is home. If you'll have me back. Always, Rowan said. Mateo met Emma that afternoon and held her with surprising gentleness for such a rough man. She's got your stubbornness, he told Evelyn. I can see it in her eyes already. Is that a compliment? Absolutely. Stubborn people survive. Life settled into new rhythms again. Mateo took over some of the work Rowan had been doing, freeing up time for him to help with Emma. They hired another hand to replace one who'd left, then another when the workload proved too much. The ranch was growing, becoming more than any of them had imagined.
Emma's first birthday came and went. She was walking now, getting into everything, fearless in the way only children could be. Watching her explore the world with such confidence made Evelyn's chest tight. This was what safety looked like, the freedom to be curious without fear. One evening in late summer, Evelyn and Rowan sat on the porch of the house watching Emma toddle around the yard under Mateo's watchful eye. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if things had gone differently?" Rowan asked. "Sometimes, but not the way I used to." Evelyn leaned against his shoulder. "I used to think about all the ways my life went wrong, losing my parents, losing Samuel, the auction, but now I think about how all of that led me here. And I wouldn't trade this for anything, even if it meant avoiding all that pain." "You think the pain was worth it?" "I think the pain made me into someone capable of appreciating this." The old Evelyn, the one from St. Louis who'd never known loss or fear, she wouldn't have valued what we have. She would have taken it for granted. Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I understand that. Sometimes I think losing Emma the way I did was what taught me to fight for you, to not let fear or propriety or anything else stop me from doing what was right." They watched Emma discover a butterfly, her delighted laughter carrying across the yard. "We should tell her about them when she's older," Evelyn said. "About Emma and Samuel and everyone we lost. Not in a sad way, but so she knows where she comes from, knows that good things can grow from hard soil." "Yeah," Rowan agreed. "We should." The years passed. Emma grew into a strong, willful child who could ride almost before she could talk. 2 more children followed, a boy named Samuel and another girl they called Rose. The ranch expanded until it was one of the largest operations in the territory. They hired more hands, built more structures, claimed more land. But through it all, Evelyn and Rowan kept the core of what they'd built intact: partnership, equality, the understanding that they'd both been broken and had chosen to heal together rather than alone. On their 10th anniversary, they rode back to the old pine tree where they'd been married. The house below was larger now, the valley dotted with cattle and horses. From up here, you could see the whole of what they'd created. "What do you think?" Rowan asked. "Was it worth it? All the work and worry and fear?" Evelyn thought about the girl who'd stood on an auction platform a decade ago, certain her life was over. She thought about the journey from that moment to this one, the violence and healing, the learning and building, the slow transformation from victim to survivor to something more. "Every second of it," she said, "even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, because the hard parts had taught her that strength wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built through surviving, through choosing to stand up every time you got knocked down, through finding people worth fighting for and fighting alongside them. She'd been sold like property. She'd been chased and threatened and nearly destroyed. But she'd survived all of it and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The ranch spread below them wasn't just land and buildings and stock. It was proof that people could change their stories, that where you started didn't determine where you ended up, that love and work and stubborn determination could transform even the hardest country into home. Emma Rose came running up the slope toward them, followed by her younger siblings. At 7 years old, she was all wild energy and fierce joy, completely unaware of the pain that had preceded her existence. "Mama, Papa, Uncle Mateo says we can go fishing if you say yes." Evelyn looked at her daughter, this bright, bold creature who knew nothing of auction platforms or fear or captivity, and felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, because life was too complicated for simple peace, but something close. Acceptance, maybe. Gratitude. The knowledge that surviving wasn't the same as living, but that surviving could be the first step toward building a life worth living. "Tell Uncle Mateo yes," she said. "But you have to be back before dark." Emma whooped and ran back down the slope, her siblings trailing behind her. Their voices echoed across the valley, young and certain in a way Evelyn had never been. And that was good. That was what all the pain and fear and fighting had been for, to build a world where her children could be certain instead of scared, where they could run toward joy instead of away from danger. Rowan took her hand, lacing their fingers together. 10 years of calluses and scars, of work that marked them both. But underneath it all, the same steadiness that had first drawn her to him. "Ready to head back?" he asked. "In a minute." Evelyn looked out across the valley one more time, committing it to memory. I just want to remember this. All of it. The sunset, the valley, the sound of her children's laughter. The man beside her who'd risked everything to give her freedom and had stayed to build a future. The life they'd carved from hard country through sheer stubborn will. She'd been sold for $3,000. She'd been treated like property, like something that could be owned. But that woman on the auction platform, scared and alone and certain her story was ending, had been wrong about everything. Her story hadn't ended. It had just been waiting for the right beginning. And this, standing on a mountain overlooking a valley she'd helped claim, with a family she'd helped create and a future she'd helped build, this was what that beginning had made possible. The chains were gone, had been gone for years. All that remained was freedom, hard-won and precious, stretching out as far as she could see.